Hey everyone, it's Sevy, and we have a new set of enemies for the Spiral Abyss 3.5 version, so it's time once again for another guide. As always, the teams used in this guide will feature 4 stars. Though I'll be using certain teams, this guide is meant to highlight the attack patterns of the enemies here and strategies you can use against them. And to avoid having to verbally repeat my usual general tips for doing Spiral Abyss, I'll just flash them on screen here and you can pause to take a quick read. By the way, this cycle's blessing grants a party-wide damage bonus whenever a character's HP decreases. Anyway, let's get to it. Some general tips for floor 11. In the first half, a Quicken team will help, but isn't strictly required. A strong shielder or healer is highly recommended. I'm going to use an Aggravate team here with Yao Yao as my healer. If you find yourself needing a shielder because you have difficulty dodging, then feel free to use one instead. The second half generally wants cryo units against the Hydro Abyss mages, mimics, and the Hydro Hypostasis slimes. I personally opted for reverse melt to have vaporize, melt, and freeze reactions, and also because the leyline disorder has a 75% pyro damage bonus. There can of course be other team types like Dendro, which can deplete Hydro auras quickly too. Just make sure Hydro isn't your main damage source since the enemies here are immune. Now let's begin the chamber. Instead of our usual defend the monolith, this chamber is timed combat, and seems to be a weaker version of Last Abyss Cycle's floor 12. We start with 2 Kairagi who can be easily edge baited. Make sure they're always in front of you so they stay together. If one dies first, the other will try to regenerate its HP, so as much as possible, kill them soon one after the other or at the same time. Then we have the Bird and Scorpion Consecrated Beasts. In order not to waste stamina, I stay on the edge of the arena and wait for them to jump, which can be iframed with bursts or dashes. But because they hit really hard, they can stagger you a lot if you don't have interruption resistance or shielding. Be conscious of using your shielding or healing as much as possible. From there, it's a matter of using AoE attacks to damage them simultaneously.
By royal decree. Stand clear.
If you see them bring out a crystal, destroying the crystal with attacks will stun them temporarily and give you a good opportunity to finish them off.
Enhanced animal module 75.
In this chamber, a group of Eremites spawn first. These will follow you, so an easy way to keep them grouped is to once again edge bait them and use your AoE attacks. These Eremites have Hydro and Cryo attacks, so beware of getting frozen. Afterwards, 3 Hydro Abyss mages spawn spread out in the arena. Use the same edge baiting tech and wait for them to teleport to you. Most times, this will cause them to spawn right beside each other, which is perfect for simultaneously freezing them and breaking their shields with cryo. Thankfully, this chamber has a lot of time available, so you don't have to stress too much.
Dodge this!
Spirit
Flame! Attack! Freeze!
Let's light it up!
The next chamber first has a group of Fatui that spawn in a relatively tight clump. I like to approach them from the right side so the Geobrazer doesn't have time to jump away. These Fatui can generate their elemental armor if you don't kill them fast enough. Next is a Mirror Maiden with Cryosis and Mages, and you'll have to run to their side. You can approach this group from the side in order to push them into each other and hit with your AoE attacks. Beware of their attacks and bubbles though, because they can trap you and freeze you.
Surrendering will be gentle.
The Mirror Maiden teleports around, so you can try to focus on it while AoE attacks damage the Sisson mages.
You're in for a little shock. Out of my sight.
The next half is full of Oceanid mimics. Cryo units will help you freeze and disable them. They will generally come to you, so you don't have to chase them much, but they can hit hard. They also leave behind Hydro bombs when they die, so dodge, iframe, shield, or just run away from those. Have healing and shields to survive their AoE attacks. Again, you can take your time here.
From whence you came.
Teamwork is dreamwork! No ingredients! You're toast!
Chamber 3 starts with a Jade Plume Terror Shroom. It enters an enraged state if you affect it with enough Quicken-based reactions. Dodge its enraged attacks and it will be stunned and more vulnerable to damage. If it starts to move around and you want to limit its movement, you can edge bait it too. Then repeat this process until it's dead. You can still beat it even without Quicken reactions, but it won't have a vulnerable stun phase.
Animal test 6308. Stand clear. Animal test 6.
You're in for a little shock. Blitz.
Last on this floor, we have another boss, the Hydro Hypostasis. At the start, it summons 2 Hydro Slimes. One heals it while the other will explode near you. You can either try to get a heal bubble whenever it creates one, or just destroy the slimes immediately. It has different attack patterns where it can be vulnerable for a short amount of time. This is your damage window. Set up before it comes down or becomes vulnerable because its vulnerability windows are so short.
Nice and spicy. Going in. Eat this.
Don't get frostbite. Ha!
Let's light it up. Nova, get them.
A touch of frost.
When it's near death, it goes to the center of the map and summons 3 Hydro Slimes in a triangle, which will revive it if they come close enough. Dash and destroy them with Cryo or Dendro, and that will defeat it.
Cool it.
Now onto floor 12. Some general tips for this floor. So for the first half, you want a Pyro teammate or 2 for the Cryo Herald and Lava Churls later on. I'll be using a Heizo national team here. For the second half, having a Cryo or Dendro unit for the Hydro Heralds will be very useful in the first chamber. The second chamber also wants good crowd control for the Serpent Knights, and the third chamber has the Wenut, which is a DPS check with short vulnerability windows. I'm using the same Aggravate team as before. Admittedly, this floor likely wants you to use a freeze or mono cryo team, which could make it easier, but since I'm limiting myself to 4 stars only, I've had better success with an Aggravate team instead. So if you have better units and equipment, be sure to use those. We start off with a group of Eremites. The male Eremites follow you, but the mommy one won't, so target the mommy one first. If you have AoE attacks, you can simply try pushing them together towards the edge, crowd controlled with Anemo to use AoE attacks on. When the mommy Eremite's health reaches a certain point, she'll bring out a scorpion and defeating it will stun her. But if you have enough damage output, you don't need to mind it. Next is a single Cryo Herald, which you can run towards. If you bait or push the Cryo Herald to the edge, he will mostly stay there. The Cryo Herald's attacks can drain your stamina, so try to dodge it when it attacks and avoid dashing unnecessarily to preserve the stamina you have.
Truth hurts.
When it gains its shield, keep applying Pyro to bring it down. Electro also works, but it's not as fast as Pyro. Bennett proved very useful here, since his skill cooldown is very fast with a strong elemental gauge, allowing him to break the Cryo shield quite quickly. This chamber's enemies have a similar layout to the first half, with Eremites spawning in first. Again, this group can be easily clumped and disposed of with AoE attacks. The Dendro Dancer will also release her own Pokemon, which you can defeat in order to stun her.
As you wish, me.
Fast. Not done yet. Stand clear.
Then 2 Hydro Heralds appear, and you can edge bait these, or just choose one and allow the other to drift towards you. These guys move around a lot, so freezing them can help you deal damage more efficiently.
Enhanced Animal Module 75.
You're in for a little shock. You've been a naughty boy.
Midnight Phantasm.
When they gain their Hydro shields, Cryo will simultaneously freeze them and deplete its shield. But if you have a Dendro unit, Dendro attacks can actually deplete its shield faster than Cryo. It will also create Dendro cores off their Hydro shield. As always, try to keep them together within your AoE attacks to deal damage more efficiently.
As you wish, man.
Yeah, stay put. Animal test 6308.
To start off Chamber 2, Maguu Kenki's buddies have left him to go solo for this Abyss cycle. If you're already very familiar with its patterns, just use iframes and dodging to avoid its telegraphed attacks. If not, you want to mainly watch out for when it's charging up its attacks.
Everybody stand back! I'm surprised, man.
Confess! Fracture!
After its invulnerable phase, face it so that its back is against the wall, and it will dash backwards by the staircase where you can keep it in place. If it dashes away, you can either chase it or restart the chamber.
Going in! You're toast! Boba, get them!
Cyclone! Fracture!
Let me weave you a verse. No, my...
In the second half, I usually start with the enemy on the left since the rightmost one can charge you with its lance. Anemo Suctions and or Freeze helps a lot here to crowd control them. If they get separated, it will take much longer to pick them off one by one. And if you bring a shielder and the Shadowy Husks hit you while you're shielded, they will generate their own buffs, which will also prolong the fight.
Come a little closer.
The second wave Serpent Knights will spawn spread out. Go to the Anemo one on the left and let the other two follow you, and there you can fight them at the edge and group them together. If the Geo Knight forms a shield, that means it's protecting its ally behind. You have to get behind it to disable the shield. Once disabled, do your best to keep them grouped and watch out for the rolling rocks on the ground. And just keep on dodging, iframing, and healing as necessary.
You're in for a little shock.
Absorption test.
Let's spark things.
On reveal by ready, go! You play, you're up! Anemo test 6308. Enhanced Anemo module 75. Shadow Raven.
On to the final chamber. First, a single Ruin Guard will spawn. The Ruin Guard can then be lured to the left or right side where the Lava Trills will spawn later. This way, when you kill the Ruin Guard, you won't have to run towards a Lava Trill anymore. When the Lava Trills spawn, let the farthest one come to you. The challenge is in surviving against their hits and cryo field since those can really hurt. Having a really good shielder and or healer will help a lot. Use iframes or dodging to avoid their dashes and smashes. Then finally, we have the Wenut boss, which might be my most hated Spiral Abyss addition so far. The Wenut's attack patterns are made up of staying underground, then making an appearance for very short periods of time. First, it spawns at the center, either doing its vertical or horizontal movement. Second, it will re-emerge generally near your position. That's why I put down some abilities that last long enough so it can start getting damaged. Third, it will come up vertically, typically on the side opposite from you, so you might be able to preempt its position.
Stand clear.
Fourth, it'll emerge once more.
Absorption test.
After this, it will come up for its floating state. When the Wenut goes into its floating state, it conjures these animal orbs. Hitting these with Pyro, Hydro, Electro, or Cryo will bring down the Wenut. In this first method of how I brought it down, Electro was applied to it and Sucrose's normal attack swirled it, thereby spreading the Electro to the orbs. When the Wenut comes down, it will get reduced resistance to the element you brought it down with, and you have a short window to damage it while stunned. Even vulnerable, it can still feel too short, so you may have to repeat this process a few times. It does the exact same pattern from the start. At least in that way, it's somewhat more predictable than the Ruined Serpent from before. Still, it's very, very annoying that we get such short damage windows. Once you understand the pattern, you could tailor your team's abilities to time when it burrows and emerges. That really depends on who your members are and what reactions you use.
You've been a naughty boy.
Animal test 6308.
Anyway, another way of bringing it down is by using a bow user to manually aim at the orbs. And be sure that the Wenut's body isn't obstructing your aim. Additionally, some coordinated abilities can also affect it, like Raiden's coordinated attacks. This boss is surely a massive time waster, so honestly, don't feel bad if you can't get 3 stars. Putting the Wenut in the abyss makes it really difficult for 4-star units on 4-star weapons to defeat it within time. And that's all for this guide. The Wenut seems to be competing for the most frustrating experience award. It feels like a worse version of the Chasm Serpent with the floating ability of the Wolf Lord, and I already hated both of those. But how about you? Let me know in the comments how you found this abyss and what teams you used. If this video helped you out, don't forget to leave a like, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon. Take care!
Adventure Team, assemble!